Hello everybody, welcome to another Sit Down with Skriv. Today's guest is Dweg, someone that I think I probably casted like my first decent online CS alongside him. So, known him for quite some time, right? Been in and around the same space for quite some time as well, since like 2017-ish, I want to say. Quite a long time, for sure. And he has quite the story, to be fair, right? Originally from Australia, moved to the UK, worked in a few different areas within esports, right? And finally hard pivoting into color commentary. And these are all things that we get into, how it's affected him, challenges, etc., etc. Feel pretty good about this one, as it's a bit more kind of succinct on my end, right? Keeping the interview to the interview, as I did enjoy, the more podcasty energy of the past couple, but I do want to keep these fairly serious on my end, as it were. Either way, you know the drill. Drop a sub, drop a like, drop a comment. Of course, we're in a new venue, so let me know what you think of this. And of course, that feedback is always super, super helpful. Your opinions on, the vibe of this one, who you want to see on the next one, etc., etc. Always appreciated. But either way, without further ado, let's get into the interview. Hello everybody and welcome back to another Sit Down with Skriv. Today I am going to be joined by my good friend Dweg. How are you doing, mate?
Mate, I'm honestly, I was waiting for the call up and I'm glad that I'm here, mate. I'm really keen to get things started.
Good. Yeah, no, indeed. I mean, we've got a long list of people to get through. I got to have all the boys on. That's how it goes, But yeah, first question, as I usually get into with most of my guests, perhaps you can give us a brief history of how you got started with casting and some of the inspirations for you getting into esports.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, it first started off at school. We had a bit of a CS team at school. We had a lot of guys that used to like go on CSGO Lounge and bet and play on matches. So it was quite a big thing in my high school, especially in my year. And a group of guys ended up going to like a gaming expo, similar to like an E3 and what have you that you have in the States. We had one locally in Sydney. And it was like a 2-day pass, I think. And it was a huge arena that had all these different expos, different games, consoles, what have you. And I walked in, and the first booth that I ended up just walking into, we had a local CS LAN event going on called EB Expo in 2016, which was like the 4 best Australian teams at the time. And I was like, oh, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to watch these guys. And I literally stayed there all day. Like, I was just glued to it. And I remember reaching out to some of the Aussie commentators. I think it was Sniper, Karath, and Elfish guy that were casting the event. And Karath, I kind of got talking to him. And I was like, oh, I've been getting into CS. I want to get into casting. I like the feel of it. I reckon I'd be okay. How can I do it? And he was like, oh, message me here and we'll kind of talk about it. Maybe put some VODs up on YouTube and what have you. And then from there, that's kind of like what started it. Applied some VODs through and he gave me like a little bit of advice. So big shout out to Kevin back in the day. And I ended up joining up with Aussie Gaming TV, which was like a small Australian agency at the time. We used to do like Cyber Gamer and ECA Premiere back when it was like ECAP, like season 32, 33, or 23, 22-ish back then. And then from there, I was with those guys for about like 6 months or so. And then I don't quite remember what happened, but there was an Aussie caster that was meant to do like an E-Frag event, and Flakes reached out to me. I'm pretty sure it was. And he was like, oh, one of the Aussie guys has pulled out. He's like recommended you as a bit of a contact. Like, do you mind stepping in? I was like, oh, just for me, great opportunity, right? I was doing like tier 3 AUCS without even getting a cent, and I got an opportunity of doing some like tier 2 EU cups at the time. So I was like, yeah, I'm gonna take this, of course. And then I kind of started working with E-Frag for a little bit. Then I think I might have casted with you a couple of times. This is probably probably mid 2017, I want to say ish. I don't know if were you around working with eFrag at that time? Around
Um,
there?
yeah, I think so. I want to say like April. Excuse me. I want to
Yeah,
say
could
like
have been.
April-ish,
Yeah,
2017 is when I got
yeah.
involved. So, and then obviously it didn't end so well. But
Well,
you know,
yeah. Yeah, that's a bit of another story. But look, anyway, from there, like it got me the taste of EU CS. I was still at school, like I was like 17, 18 at the time. So I sort of put my mind to it, like, okay, let's see where I can go with this. Ended up casting a couple of local AU lands, like just BYOCs and gaming cafe land, 8 team, 16 team events, nothing massive, $1,000 prize pool or whatever it was. And I used to catch up with some of the ESL guys from AU, and I remember like bugging them at the time. Now, I got to be honest, I wasn't the best caster back then, and I will say that. But I got the feeling that I would never go anywhere with ESL Australia. Like they were quite set with their unit they had, and to be fair, they've obviously got some really good casters, and still did back then as well. That getting someone that's like 17, 18, that's not really experienced, I can understand why. But it got me the feeling of like, if I can't break in with ESL Australia, there's not a lot here. I ended up applying for Gfinity, their elite series that we had, and I didn't get it as a caster. They ended up offering me the observing gig, which I ended up taking. And then I finished up school and I moved straight over to the UK, and I've been here 2 years now, and that's kind of how it all panned out, really.
yeah. What's some of the reasons, I suppose, that you decided to move to the UK? Because we've touched on this a little bit beforehand, and I think you're alluding to
Yeah.
it slightly there with opportunity. And now you've moved here, evidently worked with Gfinity here, worked with Blast, and
Yep.
then have now moved into like a solid casting role. You and Jay do a lot of work. So I suppose, is it like the opportunities part of the reason that you moved?
Well, one thing was obviously a British passport. Both my parents were born and raised in Britain, so it gave me the opportunity to move over to Britain and have a whole family here. Like both my parents, obviously they're living in Oz, but we're the only ones here. Aunties, cousins, grandparents, whatever it is, everyone's in the UK. So for me, it was a bit of not a no brainer, but I'd finished school and obviously a lot of my mates were going down the uni route, and it's not really something I wanted to do. Probably towards the end of high school, I wanted to kind of put casting seriously if I could. And it just wasn't happening in Oz. It really wasn't happening. To cast with some of the tier 2 European events with like 8 download megabits per second and 0.2 uploads, the latency, it was awful. And it was a struggle. I kind of looked at it and I was like, all right, maybe I'm making I don't know, a couple of $100 every month or so, but I mean, this isn't livable. So I thought, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it properly. So moved over to the UK, just thinking I know some of the UK casters. I know that I've got support there. If it doesn't quite work out, if it doesn't work out, you know what? I'll just come back home. I'll come back to Oz. That was kind of my plan in what I wanted to do. I thought, look, give it a year or two, see how we go. Maybe reevaluate after then. See, okay, has it worked? Maybe not. And then yeah, joined up with the UK. I ended up, I think, duoing with Yumi to start off, if I remember correctly. I reached out to him first because I was casting with Jay in the EFrag days and with UCC and like some of the farm cups and what have you. I don't quite remember why I didn't reach out to him. I casted my first Epic event with him, but it was more like, oh, we're just mates, we've casted together. It wasn't like we wanted to establish a duo or anything. And then I suppose working with Blast, funny story actually, with that is that I ended up going to a dinner one night, and it was like this is probably like 30, 40 people. And this guy comes around. He goes, "Oh, hi. My name's Robbie. I heard that from one of your family members that you're into esports." I was like, "Oh yeah." Talking to this guy, and I recognized his face, and I'm like, when you see someone and you're like, "I know him from somewhere, but I don't know where from." And he's like, "Oh, I'm the CEO from Blast." I was like, "Ah, okay. Well then, that's where I know you from." So I kind of told him about like my situation. I wanted to get into casting, and he said, "Well, why don't you come down for an interview?" In our London office. Ended up working at Blast for about 6 or 7 months or so, working on some of their content side. doing like decks, proposals to new clients and what have you. So that was a really different experience considering I did casting for like the last 2 or 3 years. So yeah, that was a very different adventure working there.
Hmm. Yeah, it definitely does sound, you know, like you could have learned a lot there from the business side and things like that,
Yeah.
right? And I think you did a little bit of casting with them as well, if I'm remembering correctly. There was like
Yeah.
an Australian time zone stream
Yep.
that they did and whatnot. Yeah, I think it's a very good company, obviously, to work with and to
Yeah.
have a pretty solid connection at. Um, is there maybe something that you learn from doing more behind the scenes stuff that you now apply into your casting career?
Absolutely. Nah, for sure. The one big thing is like connections, right? One thing I learned from them is, the way that they have interviews with people, like, or maybe not interviews, but they sit down and they present their product and what have you. That was something that I didn't really think about. Like, for example, I'll give a bit of an experience for me. If I try and reach out to, I don't know, tier two organizations, see maybe a new event on HLTV or Liquipedia or something,
Mm.
before I might have just sent over like a CV or like an email to say, oh, this is who I am. But now I've gotten into the habit of actually making like presentations and showing like a show reel and showing some of the experience and, making it graphically pleasing, which is something I worked with them a lot back when I was working with them, which is something that I didn't even consider, right, as a cast. It wasn't something that I'd ever even thought about. Is that, yeah, maybe you might be a decent caster, but if you're not presenting yourself correctly in a pitch or a presentation, then you're going to look like an absolute nobody and they're not going to be interested to even talk to you about it.
Yeah, I think the degree of competition, right, particularly for some of your bigger operators and things like that, or again,
Yep.
newer operators that come in and
For sure.
they're inundated with people. There's going to be an awful lot of, just that competition ultimately that you have to try and get ahead of and be noticed. They probably get, I'd say like tens of emails, but all the same, a fair
Quite a bit.
amount.
Yeah.
With that kind of thing, so it does make sense. You mentioned a little bit earlier. I kind of want to get some of your opinions, maybe like saying that the CS at your school and everything was relatively popular. Now I would say you're not too far removed from where I'm at. I think there's like a couple of years between us, but
Yeah.
CS for me wasn't all that big. Do you think it's like more popular in Australia in that sense, or
Yeah.
was it just more
Yeah.
down to your school?
No, I don't think so. I had a company, a TO, a few years back. I think they were called Flat Test Gaming, and I suppose it's like similar to the Newell, right, that you've got in the UK, of like the university leagues. We had high school leagues. I don't think we competed in them, but I remember talking with them a couple of times in the past. That it was. I mean, in our year, we probably had. I would say in my year, we probably had like 200, 210 students, and 40 to 50 of them played CS, or at least played it once, I want to say. Maybe 10 of them actually took it a little bit more seriously. I mean, no one that was at my school tried to play at like a decent level or anything like that. But, the casual, Friday afternoon, we finished school, let's go and play some matchmaking or go play a Face It game. Or let's go to the LAN cafe and maybe participate in a local LAN or something like that. But I certainly felt that not only in my year, but maybe not so much years above. I mean, to be fair, I wasn't that friendly with anyone I mean, you get that in school, right? If you're a couple of years younger than someone else, you might not. Maybe if it's a family friend or something like that, you might talk to them. But otherwise, you kind of stick to your own year. So I don't know about the older years, but certainly the younger years, they were even more involved in CS than I was, or not that I was, but our year was. There was a lot of people, maybe 3 or 4 years below us, that were like really into CS, and even playing at not a decent level, but at least like ESEA Open and things like that, and trying to actually see if they can make it somewhere.
Yeah, it's certainly something that I've noticed. Like, I have a few friends with younger siblings and stuff like that, and it's becoming a bit more open. I mean, there's people that I've like met from my school and things like that maybe were in my year or whatever, and have perhaps followed the esports, seen me about a little bit, with friends on Facebook or whatever, and they'll and I had no idea, but I think it's become like much more open in these past few years to kind of be interested in, and obviously like the esports side of things is now, I guess, the next step where we're trying to grow that and get that a bit more normalized and things like that, and it's certainly getting there for sure. So a really interesting question that I usually go with for a lot of my guests within their role and whatnot, and you obviously starting very young, have been doing it for quite some time. Who would you say some of the inspirations are when it comes to casting, getting into it, and then also now, I guess, that you're more established, who do you learn from?
Look, that's a good question. I think growing up, even before I was even into casting, it had to be Sponge, right? Like there was no doubt about it. Being in Oz, we didn't have that much international experience in CS. I'm thinking back to maybe the 2015 days, maybe even 2014 at that. You had Vox Eminor and Immunity, and that was pretty much it back then. And Sponge was the guy that was the guy, right? He was the captain. He was like the funny one in the interviews. And I think everyone looked up to him, even people that I knew that were involved in the esports scene or people that played CS that I knew. We all kind of looked up to him because he gave our region a chance. And I think that's really what put OCE CS on the map was that, Vox Eminor, yeah, you might be getting absolutely pumped and, shouting cunt and things like that. And, everyone finding it funny and what have you. But the bottom line is, it was like, we're not here to be the Joker team. Like, we're actually here to put results up. And then, when Renegades go overseas and then, they're in Las Vegas and what have you, I think it was certainly touching that Sponge was the guy that I looked up to the most. I think when I got into casting, I mean, a lot of people probably wouldn't say this guy, but Dazed to me was actually a really big inspiration in terms of a talent. I still think to this day that he was one of the best color commentators that I've ever heard of. Maybe his linguistics and things like that weren't fantastic. Obviously, he was a player; he wasn't a caster as such. But the way that he saw the game was incredible. Him and Blue back in the day doing the Pro League streams at NA, like I was just glued to it because you could see like a simple execution or just like a default, and Dazed would know exactly what's going on, the timings, the rotations. He's played with players in the past. So in terms of talent, Dazed was someone that I looked up to very early on when I got into casting. Not that I wanted to be a to be a color commentator. When I started off, I actually was doing a fair bit of play-by-play and then moved into color later on. And then probably the Aussie guys as well. Elfish Guy, Karath, Sniper, Brainstorm, people like that who had been towards the top end of Australian casting at the time. You've got to look up to them because they're promoting esports in your own region and they're damn good at it. So yeah, probably those list of people, to be honest.
Yeah, I notice, you talk about, I think, in CS particularly, the way that the flow works with casting and whatnot.
Yep.
You don't necessarily get into it immediately with like a super defined role. You don't have to make that decision from the get-go. So I guess my next question would be, where does that pivot come from? Where does the decision come from that you decided you wanted to go into the color commentary?
It's good. I don't know, to be honest. I think that I just thought that there was a shortage of color commentators in tier 2. During my time in Oz, I think I was a bit of a hybrid. Like I did a bit of color, but I did a bit of play-by-play. Like I didn't really have a defined role. And then when I moved to the UK, I almost felt like we didn't have colors. And I was like, okay, there's my niche right there. I love the game. I'd like to think even at the time when I was, still sort of coming up, just moving over here, that I thought, you know what, let's have a crack. Let's see if I can actually push it as a color. And then sort of after a few months of doing that, I ended up sort of finding my footing. So I don't know whether it was a personal choice or whether it was just knowing that I could probably go, you know what, now I think about it, actually, I think that my linguistics for play-by-play weren't strong enough. And it was something that when I was working, I mean, I can't even remember the events I was doing when I first moved here. Probably like your Epic Lands, maybe a couple of UCC loot bets and what have you. I kind of felt to myself, looking back and reviewing a lot of my casts, this isn't good enough. And when you've got people like yourself, Yumi, Dinko, Hawker, Dean, Mitch, that were all like on the up and up and coming in sort of 2018, going into 2019, I was like, I'm just not good enough. So why don't I just swap over to something that I think I might suit better? And it just felt that once I moved into color, I felt so much more comfortable. And I was like, damn, I wish I just should have done this years ago.
Yeah, I think there is a fair amount of that, isn't there? And learning both roles and whatnot. There are, at least at our kind of level, like less hard colors, because you do just by virtue of working with other people and, maybe not having enough time to fully communicate and all that kind of stuff. You have to have a bit of a proficiency at both. And I think certainly having experience as a play-by-play, it does shine through in your casting style for sure. You know what I mean? You have like a few moments where, because of the nature of the game, you have to put something together, on the fly or whatever when that big moment happens. And then I think something that you and Jay do very, very well is bringing the hype kind of together. So moving into that, where does the decision to work with Jay come from, right? Because you talked about Yumi, you talked about others. Finding that partner is once again another thing, because there aren't super defined roles within CS commentary. You don't necessarily put a lot of focus on that. You see stuff like League, people who are, I guess, our equivalent in that, for example, a scene that I've done a little bit of work in. They will very, very quickly like latch onto someone and make sure they've got a color to go with. So where does the decision to work with Jay come from?
Look, I think what it came down to is that I'd casted an epic with it, and we had a really good time. I thought that, like, style wise, we worked pretty well together. We ended up casting a couple of like the Grosvenor lands from Epic as well, and I actually really enjoyed casting with Jay. And then what happened was, obviously I got picked up by Blast, and while I was sort of at the job at Blast when I was working there, I couldn't do casting as well. That was one of the restrictions. I mean, look, you can understand it, why. Like, if I'm working for Blast, I don't want to be casting for ESL. Like, I can understand from their perspective why they didn't want me to do casting. So it got to a point where my contract was ending with Blast. I could have renewed it. Like, I could have. They actually did ask me if I wanted to continue a full-time position there, but if I took a full-time position, I'd have to leave casting completely. And that was a big decision for me, because it was like, freelance, don't really know how much money you're going to get month by month. Full-time job, you know how much you're going to be getting as a salary. You know that you're going to be comfortable for the year. But I've moved all the way to the UK. I thought that maybe I could go somewhere with casting, and I'm not casting. So I ended up sitting down with Jay, and he kind of, I was like, you know what, I need some advice, mate. Like, what do you reckon? And he was like, I enjoyed casting with you as well. Do you want to try and establish a duo? And when my time was up with Blast, I just went straight to Jay, and I was like, you know what, let's do it. I'm feeling refreshed. I haven't casted for like 6 or 7 months now. I want to get back into it. And that's kind of how it sort of came about. I'd worked with Jay a lot in the past. I kind of had a look as well with sort of duos, and I almost felt like everyone was together. Like, I didn't feel like there were a lot of people that were individual, and I wanted to partner with a play-by-play. There was no doubt about that. Like, casting with someone like Yumi wouldn't really work. I mean, we obviously did it a couple of times working for some events in the past, but we're both like kind of colors to an extent. So you've got to get something that meshes. And I just thought with Jay, that for me was the perfect duo to work with. So I reached out to him straight away, and it just sort of started from there, which was like the end of 2019, about November or December time.
Yeah, I mean, time flies in that sense, eh? It feels not that long ago, to be honest, to see you two coming onto the scene and you working at Blast and whatnot. So, but I mean, 2020 has been a hell of a year. The less said about that, the better, I suppose.
Yeah.
So, with you guys working more solidly together and working quite a large volume of events and in the I would say the online scene, but obviously,
Yeah.
once again,
Yeah.
everything's kind of online. Where do you look to take your duo style? Like, what kind of things do you focus on? What kind of things do you prioritize when working together? Because I would imagine, again, it's kind of that when you're solidly in the partnership, there's a lot more that can be said, a lot more kind of honesty about, I want to try these things and whatnot. So what are the primary factors that you focus on?
Look, the one big thing, I always felt like if I was working with someone, let's say I was working with you for an example, Skriv. I know that we've worked a couple of events together and,
Yeah.
filled in a couple of times if Jay's unavailable or, if Keith's, not around or something like that, we'd always help each other out. But I would almost feel a little bit awkward to say, oh, I thought your intro was shit. Or do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
With Jay, now that because we've worked together for so long, if he does something that I don't agree with, I don't feel bad that like sometimes I do rip into him and he rips into like it's vice versa.
Mhm.
But the bottom line is you've got to be honest with each other if you want to improve. If you kind of sit there and you're like, oh Jay, great cast, and it wasn't, then you're not going to improve, right? You got to be blunt, you've got to be honest. And I think that's something we share between one another really well, is that because we are a solid duo, we can kind of maybe not so much target our weaknesses, but I can point something out to him and he'll be like, yep, I agree. And we'll just work on it. One thing we try and work on a lot, maybe so much more him than me, is obviously bringing hype. I think that Jay is certainly one of the play-by-plays out there, sort of like in the tier 2 scene or casting the tier 2 cups, who actually does, certainly bring the hype. He can get really loud. And it does work well that we are very different in the way we cast. I'm a little bit more laid back. I'm sort of doing a little bit more analytical stuff, slowing it down. And then Jay comes in with the hype moments. And then, every now and then, like you mentioned before, considering I've had a little bit of play-by-play experience, I can do the play-by-play in situations that need it, but I don't really tend to. So I want to say we actually focus on stuff individually, to be completely honest. Like, obviously, we do demo reviews and we work together to say, okay, this worked out really nicely. This worked out, maybe it could have been a bit better. But I like to focus on my own stuff, watch demos, do my research and what have you. And then Jay likes to work on some of his storylines. One thing that he brings a lot as a play-by-play is building up stories of some of the teams, where they've been, where they've come from, some of the roster changes and things like that. So there is a lot of preparation, I want to say, that goes into a lot of events that we do. And we do sit down, we share each other's notes. There's no point me doing 2 hours of research and then not giving it to him, right? Like, you might as well be open to him. Yeah, you might say, oh, you bastard stole, my line or whatever it might be. But we're trying to bring the best to the broadcast. And if it means he's using one of my points or I'm using one of his points in a certain moment, so be it.
Yeah. What is something that you focus on when doing research then? Because I think this is a really interesting area, that there's so many different facets and things that you can look at. Like, I personally would say that I'm not massively into like the statistical analysis. It's good to have, and but I tend to stick to very simple, your HLTV scoreboard. The in-game scoreboard maybe doesn't give quite enough information. But yeah, what are the things that you look for, and therefore I suppose then go on to bring up on the broadcast?
Yeah, I would kind of say, like, typically for a best of 3, for example, I would probably do about an hour and a half to 2 hours of research per best of 3. And what that comes down to, so I start off with like a stats page. Let's say team name, HLTV ranking, all 5 players, analyst, coach, what teams they've been on in the past. If you're in technical pauses, I remember Body when he was playing on G2 back in 2016, things like that. I like to be able to draw back to history a fair bit. So past teams, how old they are, what role are they? Are they a T-side lurk? Are they an in-game leader? Are they an entry player? So that in the moment of chaos, if I forget that, okay, Nealon's the lurk for K23, it's right there on the sheet in front of me that I can kind of draw on, maybe into pre-games. I kind of try and focus in like last 3 months, where have they been in MDL? Where have they been in Shadow League or Loot Bets or what have you? If they've been getting playoff runs, are they finding a little bit more success picking Inferno or Nuke, or are they more city-sided, more T-sided? So that's kind of like my stats page that probably, I don't know, takes me like 20, 30 minutes, kind of just copy everything from HLTV. Maybe some fun facts. It's the 1,000th map played by Nilan, or like, I don't know, it's Harry's birthday on Dignitas. Maybe pull in some fun facts every now and then. But I would say my main research just comes through demo watching. I like to try and watch sort of 2 demos a day, if possible. Sometimes focus on more so a team, maybe an individual. So then if I can do that before a broadcast, I don't know, let's just say K23 is a prime example. I know that Jay and I cast him about 50 times last year, where because we cast them so often and I'm watching demo reviews as well, not only is it helping me to line out individuals and their playstyle, but actually live in the cast, I can see a setup, maybe not all the time, but certainly teams that we cast regularly, I'll go, I know exactly what's happening here. I know that this is a fake, or I know that this is going to be a walk exi, or whatever it might be. Because yes, that's do tell a big picture, obviously, but I feel like watching demos and understanding teams further helps me give insight on a broadcast. Because I mean, when you're casting, right, there's 10 players. You don't always get to see all 10 players.
Yeah.
You might cast an entire map where you might only see one player once get a kill, but he's got 20 kills in the map. So, you know, how did he get 20 kills if we only saw one of them? So I would say the majority of my research probably comes through watching demos.
Yeah, it's a lot of what we say, isn't it? That statistically, you can't always, like, when someone's not performing very well, by the numbers, that might not actually be the case. You know, you go back and watch the demo, and all of a sudden, their timing, or just the fact that they are being the bait or whatever, you know, is really making all the difference. How do you feel you've started to move into creating some content, right? Which seems to be, I've talked about, I think, with pretty much all of my guests at some point, because everyone seems to be, you know, projecting a bit here, self included, seems to be getting into it and trying to build the brand in that way. But the question for you more goes to the fact that how does that help you with your, again, like the analysis that you're able to bring in the game? Because I think there is a difference, isn't there, between, you know, watching the demos for a few hours a day and also then vocalizing some of your ideas and talking it over. I think from time to time you stream them as well when you're doing the breakdowns and whatnot. So maybe there's some people that you can interact with from the chat and things like that. How does the analytical content help your analysis in your casting?
Certainly one thing, like if I'm watching a demo, this is obviously like without content and what have you, I might have a notepad in front of me and I'm, you know, writing down notes, repositions, nades, timings, things like that. But I often feel like if I'm vocally putting it out there, I'm actually like learning a little bit more. Certainly the majority of demos I do for content wise are more on individuals than teams, because it can be quite difficult to actually describe what a whole team is doing. Like, obviously, you can look at it and be like, okay, you know, he's moving here. This is what's happening. And it's in your head. But to actually describe live without kind of stopping it and being like, hang on, I'm going to go back. Because when I stream them on my channel, the last thing I want to do, right, is watch a round and then go, actually, I'm going to go back and watch that again. I missed that. I'm going to go back and do it again.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to show the viewers the same round 4 times, because that sometimes is something that I might do on my own, is that, oh, okay, that was quite interesting. I missed that. I'm going to go back. But it is getting boring for the people that are watching, that a one map demo can take like 2 hours sometimes. So the reason I wanted to actually stream them, then edit them and put it up on YouTube, is that I kind of get to interact on Twitch. Like, I don't often stream that often. You know, maybe I might stream a cash cup or do some MDL casting or some advanced or what have you. But to be honest, I don't actually stream that often. I mean, maybe that's my downfall. I don't know. Maybe that's something I need to work on. But that way I can answer people's questions. I know that I don't have a massive following on Twitch when I do the demo reviews, probably get anywhere between like 10 and 15 viewers. Sometimes it could be more depending on the person I do. Like, I don't know, if I put up Flamesy was a great example. I said that I was doing a demo review of him and he like retweeted it and commented it. Then I had 60 people watching on the stream. So it does depend in that avenue, but it just means that I can create content via my Twitch that can then be edited later for YouTube, as well as actually engaging with the Twitch audience, answering questions. A lot of the thing you don't see in the YouTube video that happens on the stream is that I'll often check chat at the end of a round. I'll pause it and it'll be like,
Right.
okay, why did that crossfire happen? And I'll answer the person. Obviously, it's not that interesting to put it in a YouTube video, but I get to interact with a Twitch audience and then a YouTube audience. So that's sort of how it's been panning out for the last, I don't know, couple of months or so.
Yeah. Again, I think we could talk about it for a very long time, but I would be going around in circles, and it crops up, as I say, every interview. It feels like that there's so much space, there's so much to be done for you personally, but then also in my last episode, we were talking about trying to get it within the again, that mid-level, that tier 2 space, right, and get some of those operators involved and whatnot, but budget is always a bit of an issue, I think, with that kind of thing, and certainly you can do it on your own vices, but then you start doing it for another company, it becomes a bit of a different situation. But I always find it really, really intriguing to like check out all these different people. For me, I think it was like Elmer Puddy was one of the first ones to stand out, and then Hawker with his content. Launders has started pushing a hell of a lot more out as well, and yourself. And I think there's so much or so many perspectives to draw from, and I always find that an awful lot of fun. Moving forwards, though, with everything that we've kind of touched on and talked about here, I kind of want to know what do you think? You've worked in a lot of different areas, in a few different roles, right? That indeed can feed into each other. Observing, I think adminning at one point, if that's the correct way of saying it, right? What would you say one of the most valuable lessons from all these experiences would be?
I think casting, to be honest. I've done a bit of an observing. Thing is, though, it is difficult to draw observing into casting. It's a very, very different role. Adminning, I suppose one thing that you could potentially draw from it is sort of like your relations with players and what have you, right? Like, I know certainly in the tier 2 scene that there's often players like, I don't know, let's just call out the tick attacking guys, for example. I'll speak to them pretty regularly on Twitter, or sort of joke with them and what have you. That was something that you get to do a fair bit being in as an admin. You're behind the scenes, you get to talk to some of the players, and you get a little bit of insight here or there, maybe seeing how they're playing the game or what have you. So they don't sort of correlate massively,
Right.
but I think where I've learned my most is probably the casting aspect, only because although I've done observing in the past and I've done adminning in the past, it's not so. It's like, obviously, if a gig comes up and there's no casting, then I'm probably going to take an adminning or observing gig, because money's money and you've got to pay the bills. But it's not two areas that I wanted to push that far. I mean, to be fair, honestly, observing was at a point something I wanted to do a lot more. I got the chance of observing on LAN for Gfinity Elite Series, being the main observer there, and then being a replay obs for Blast Pro Series Copenhagen. But it just really didn't feel like there were a lot of opportunities. I reached out to people. I know that I had one opportunity once that one of the producers from ESL reached out to me as like a backup to be for like a pro league or something like that for like a week or so, but I had something on at the time and couldn't take that. Outside of that, that is the only observing gig that I've been offered in 2 years. So I kind of thought to it, you know what, it's not an area that I kind of want to push that much anymore. If the gigs aren't coming, I might as well just focus on one and focus in on casting entirely.
Yeah, I mean, makes a lot of sense, right? And I think if you just don't quite have the passion for it and the drive for it, as well, right? And I don't know, observing is a tough one. I think there's so many different things that come into it, so many different styles within that as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that I wouldn't be any good at, to be honest. Trying to focus on the right player at the right time. There's just a bit too much maybe going on, and then trying to coordinate hands and all that kind of stuff. It's not my forte, shall we say.
Give it a go, mate. Give it a go. See what it's like.
Well, they'll probably do that at some point where they like a bit of a flip of roles kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or whatever, and get the observers to cast and all that. That could be a lot of fun, actually. That could be an awful lot of fun. Another area that I ask a lot of my guests here, though, Dweg, that I think is kind of interesting to touch on, and obviously you yourself, once again, with those different areas that you've gotten involved in and stuff, maybe the business side of things has perhaps opened up some ideas into the future. What would you say your goals are? I'd say both as a caster, and then maybe if you could expand a bit further on that. It does depend, because I ask some people, and they don't have super long term. They like to think, here and now. Others have very, very broad goals with little, kind of stepping stones, as it were, to get there. So I just wanted to get your take on that.
Oh, it's funny actually, because I linked Jay the little segment in the Tea Time interview that you had where he was kind of talking about his goals of like major finals and things like that, and it was something that we actually spoke about the other day. I'm a very realistic person, right? Like, for me to say that I think I'm gonna cast a major final, like, you fucking got to be kidding yourself, right? Like, I'm not even in a position where I've casted a proper international LAN. So I do think, in the sense of like 1 year at a time. Like, obviously my goal for 2021, I think that Jay and I had an opportunity of doing a lot last year, and although it was a pretty shit year with COVID and what have you, I think that it was one of my best years for casting individually. So going forward, I think one of the main goals is obviously to try and get a LAN. Whether that actually happens, who knows, right? Try and maybe make them move from, maybe not more consistently from tier 2 to tier 1 opportunities, but just try and continue getting those tier 1 opportunities. I know that last year we did a little bit of Pro League on like the B stream and the C stream. We did a couple of RMR events. We got to fill in for IEM Beijing. I mean, again, filling in, because you always know, right, that when some of the top guys drop out, they've got to look to someone else. And if you're that guy, you know what? I don't mind being that person. It's an opportunity at the end of the day. So yeah, maybe getting a dream hack or another ESL one or an IEM, even if it's just one for next year, that's probably my main goal. Another goal would probably just to be the best that I can. Rather than saying I want to be the best caster out there, I just want to know that I can push myself further to where I am. If I find out at the end of next year that I've actually been able to develop my game knowledge further and I feel like I'm casting better, well, that's a goal for me. Long term, tough one.
Always.
I'd like to take casting quite far if possible. One area I have actually been thinking about over the last maybe month, 2 months or so, and I've got a couple of offers, is doing some coaching and some analytical work with some teams. Now that's something that maybe down the line I would want to do full time, maybe. Right now, though, I don't think that's what I want to do. Like, if a team reached out to me and asked me for like a part-time position, I would probably take it. If I could maybe do some like late demo watching at night and I could send them over the information the next day. But I don't want to do anything that jeopardizes what's happening with casting at the moment. I know that I spoke to you probably about it like earlier last year when COVID started kicking off. Like, I was looking for a second job because I wasn't getting the casting work. You've got rent to pay, you've got car insurance to pay, you've got bills. And I was on the borderline of like, losing it all in the sense I had like literally no money. And I was getting worried, because that can be one of the scary factors of freelancing, is that sometimes work just doesn't come. And I was applying for some of the supermarkets. I ended up looking to be like tutoring junior school kids. I think that's what you call them in the UK, like from like 6 till 12 in mathematics, because that was an area that I'm very strong in. So I was thinking, maybe do a couple of jobs a week, handful of jobs, maybe get 100, 150 quid a week, just to, get at least a little bit of money by. And then all of a sudden, I think April came, and that's when I started working with Grid, with Home Sweet Home, and 9 to 5, and some of the ESL gigs. So it did take a lot of pressure off my back. But but maybe try to find something in the future that is sustainable. Whether that's moving up to tier 1 casting and getting that sustainability there, because look, in tier 2 it can be tough. I know that you've probably had experience with it as well, Skriv. Sometimes the work doesn't come. Sometimes you get undercut by other people, and then you lose a job, and then the rates go down, and then you're not accepting it because it's too low. It can be tough. So maybe in the future, something a little bit more sustainable, something a little bit more full time. Whether they get contracts out for tier 2 casters, maybe we'll have to wait and see.
The dream, the absolute
dream.
mate. It would be good. It would be good. You know, I think so. One day it's all like down to the top end and stuff like that. I think it starts to trickle, doesn't it? You know, with the whole like payment thing, for example. That very quickly followed in kind of the tier 2 scene. It's still not perfect, right?
It's getting better.
But it's certainly a hell of a lot better. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. So, but yeah, I definitely resonate with some of the areas that you're talking about with, you know, the work not coming in. And then you also have the other side of the coin that it's like, okay, if I pick up this part-time work or maybe this, you know, full-time offer that I have, whether it's endemic to esports or not, that's very nice, you know, it's consistent and pays relatively well for a 20-something-year-old, you know. But then you have that fear of availability.
What happens?
Yeah, exactly. Relevancy and all that kind of stuff. I guess that moves into another area that we could talk about. What maybe are some of the challenges that you've had to face? Obviously, you have this freelance challenge, but maybe more so with casting, like, you know, moving from play-by-play to color. What was something that you had to bridge over, that kind of thing? Maybe you could give us a rundown of some of those.
Honestly, like, it's gonna sound a little bit egotistic, but like, I actually didn't find it that difficult. I just felt more comfortable with it. Like, obviously, one thing I had to change was pacing, right? Like, being a play-by-play, you're a lot quicker, you're maybe a little bit more hyped. So that was one of the big challenges, is actually being like, mate, like, you know, calm it down. You're a color now, okay? You know, just because you're analyzing something doesn't mean, you know, it's a bloody massive 4K or it's a huge clutch. So that's probably the main challenge, was pacing and maybe pitch. Another one was obviously getting the game knowledge. Right, I thought that my game knowledge was decent when I transitioned over to color, but you've got to put a lot of work in. You've got to understand the game really well. You've got to be able to constantly be on your toes, right? Certainly in tier 2, right, for the majority of the teams, you get roster moves, crazy amount. Like, you could get teams that make 8-9 roster moves in a year. You've got to be up to date with that. Let's say, I don't know, there's a new Polish team, Anonymous or something like Anonymously or something like that, that I saw come through, which is like Snacks and Kai and Kyla. Well, if someone new joins that team, I've got to know about that player, because the last thing I want to do is go into a broadcast and be like, oh, you know, they've picked up this young guy. And Jay's like, oh, you know, what kind of player is he?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Like, all I know is he's joined the team. So one of the struggles is keeping up to date with the individuals, knowing their play style, knowing the roster moves, and just constantly knowing how the meta's changing. You know, are we seeing more teams running defaults? Are we seeing more teams force buying? I mean, one thing that you see a lot in CIS Counter-Strike is fucking really slow defaults, right? You look at Gambit, K23, Navi Jr., Espada, like, you could literally be going for a minute 20, minute and a half, and nothing has happened. Like, they're still running all over the map on the T side. So it's understanding how teams are changing. So I think certainly one of the biggest challenges is, obviously, let's say casting day as a prime example. Maybe you're casting a couple of best of threes. So you do your research beforehand. That takes, I don't know, maybe let's say 2-3 hours. Then you've got to wait, you've got delays, you've got overtimes. Okay, that's now a 7-hour broadcast. And then, okay, well, I've got to do my research for tomorrow. But actually, there was a roster move coming in from Navi Jr. So I want to keep up to that, but then I want to do my research for tomorrow. So one of the biggest challenges, I want to say, actually, now thinking about it, is time management. Knowing what areas are most important. Is doing demo reviewing when I'm working 5 days in a row as important as keeping up with some of the other changes and what have you. So time management is a big struggle that I found moving from play-by-play to color.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely fair, right? And then you've got to try and get your content out there at the moment as well.
Yeah, got to put that out there.
Yeah, so it's It's kind of difficult. I wanted to ask, and this is not something that I've really asked before, but let's say picture a scenario where we've just had like a 1v3 clutch, right?
Yeah.
And then it comes to you, Jay's off the mic, having a drink, having just given his all, kind of thing.
Yep.
What are some of the things that you would look for in that? It's kind of hard to picture in your mind. Maybe there's one that you've got in your mind, but what's something that you would like to pinpoint, that you would like to make your 20 to 25 second point before the next round begins?
Well, first time, I mean, you get the jokers out there that sort of say, like, you don't win a 1v3, you lose a 3v1. One thing, it's difficult, right? Because you don't want to be the bad guy. And I certainly think that being negative on broadcast, it's a fine line, because you want to be blunt and you want to tell the truth. But at the same time, if you just rip into a team that lost a 3v1 and played it awfully, you kind of have to get the point over. But you also want to hype up the guy that just won the clutch. So it's very situational. I would say the majority of the time in a 3v1, or if he wins a 1v3 as an example, I would say what he did well in that. Okay, how did he isolate the 1v1s? Did he use utility? Did he go slow about it? Did he go fast about it? Was he working with some mind games? Did he try and fake that he was on another side of the map? And then occasionally, I'd say maybe 20, 25% of the time, that was just awful. They just peeked in one by one. The clutch wasn't even that fantastic. They just fed him and they got hungry.
Right.
So it depends on sometimes how I'm feeling. Am I in that mood where I'm just like, I'm ready to rip out? And especially, like, here's an example, right? Let's say it's round 5, it's a 1v3 clutch, it comes through, and you're like, okay, that was pretty decent. Next round is round 6, the same thing happens again, and it's the opposition with 3 players making the same mistakes again. Well, then I'm going to rip into them because I've seen it only just that last round. How have you let it happen again? And that's sometimes where I can maybe bring my pitch up a little bit more, be a little bit more serious, maybe a little bit more harsh. I know that maybe that's something I need to look at. Is that the right thing to do? Is it not? Because I like to tell the truth, but I don't like to be too negative. I mean, the last thing you want is a broadcast is a 16-14 result, a great game, but it was scrappy and it was poor, and I'm picking at the mistakes, right? Because you don't want to listen to a game where I'm just picking at mistakes. So I think it's a fine line of it being situational or not. I like to focus on the positives as much as possible, but I will, often, maybe not often, but will sometimes lean at the negatives of how that was poorly played for a clutch to come through, as an example.
Yeah, it was something, I think, early on that, like, Henry got a fair amount of shtick for was being a little bit too negative, I seem to remember. And then obviously it probably gets harder as you move up and you're dealing with bigger teams with bigger fan bases.
Absolutely.
That therefore are just not going to allow you to be negative at the end of the day. But yeah, certainly a fine line. But I guess from what you're saying, you still think it's important to stay grounded.
It is, because, you've got to stick to your principles, right? And if your principles are telling the truth, you've got to say it how it is sometimes. It might be a bitter pill to swallow, but it's the truth. I've had on occasions, coaches and players reach out to me after the game after listening to a certain moment, and there has been times where I've said, you know what, I said the wrong thing. My bad. If I say something that maybe isn't quite correct and it's a bit harsh, and I look back at it and I listen to it and I go, you know what? Yeah, you are probably right. I'll put my hand up and say, you know what, mate? Fuck, I'm sorry. Okay. Didn't quite mean that. Maybe I was in, not having a great day or whatever it might be. But when I get a player telling me that I've said something wrong, when I stand by it, well, they could just get fucked. Like, it's as simple as that, right? Because you will get players like that. That do think that they know best. Certainly in the UK scene, I'm not gonna mention anyone. Yeah, I think that if you're not telling the truth, you're not casting to your best. That's the way I look at it. If I'm pushing it aside and saying, oh, that was okay, I'm not doing my job properly. My job is to be the color caster and to analyze what's happened. And if I'm just pushing it aside as, oh yeah, it's pretty rainbows, it was good, it's good, and it wasn't, I'm not being a caster or color caster correctly. That's how I look at it.
Well, there you go. Look, mate, I think that's gonna do us. But yeah, I think you definitely have like a solid attitude. I really love that. And I also love the fact that you came on. Thank you for joining me, and I'm glad we got to do this.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad as well. You know, getting the call up, getting involved. No, it's great, mate. I think the content series is working out really nicely for you. I think you've really found like the niche of what works for you. This is what, like, your 7th or 8th interview now. You've got quite a few going.
Yeah, I think in terms of recording them, this would be like my 7th. I think. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I suppose an ending question for you is like, where is this going? Are we going to get tier 1 people on here? Are we going to get players? What's the goal here for you, Skriv?
I'm hoping so. I've reached out to a few people. All
right.
Trying to find open Twitter DMs. You know how it is. Is always a challenge. Yeah, and then it's like, well, I'll give it a go. I'll email the agency email, but I doubt, because it's not like a paying gig. Probably not gonna take it to them. But yeah, that's kind of the goal, right. So, and I'll admit, I've been trying to practice and learn on the job, as it were. I think my last couple have been a bit more podcasty. This one I tried to be like succinct, give my little thoughts, and then move into the next question, that kind of thing. Still sending the feelers out there, but I got plans, and then some other content ideas as well. But that's for me to know at this point.
All right.
Yeah. There you go. But look, a lot of fun, mate. I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks again.
No worries, mate.
And there it is, Big man Dweg. A lot of fun, as always. Really, really, really liking this one and how it's turned out. Like I said at the beginning, making sure that I am, training myself to not talk too much. I love the sound of my own voice. It is true, I will admit. But making sure that I keep things nice and clean and succinct and easy to follow along with. Keep the questions rolling, right? And learning how to pull information and form good questions from what they're saying and what I'm getting from them, etc., etc. But yeah, I mean, I guess I can apologize for last week. I only put the one out, but I was pretty busy on the weekend. Had a bit of a hold up with the editing as well, but should have at least 2 this week, I think, if not. Maybe it's Thursday by the time I'm getting this done. So 2 this week. We'll go with 2, okay? As always, though, I appreciate your support. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.